The drone flies low over the swamp. It finds something strange in the grass. A massive python lies dead in the mud. Its head is gone. Something tore it clean off. Cut to a lab table. Scientists open up a native snake. Its lungs are packed with tiny white worms, hundreds of them. They're still moving. Text appears on screen. This is not the invasion. It's what came after. For 20 years, experts warned us. The Everglades was dying. Giant pythons were taking over. Everyone knew that story, but nobody predicted this. The cameras captured something in the swamp, something that left scientists speechless. A hidden parasite, a native predator fighting back, and a bizarre plan the world laughed at. What you're about to see isn't just an invasion story. It's a three-way war nobody saw coming. Long before the chaos, the Florida Everglades was a miracle. It wasn't just a swamp. It was a vast river of grass that stretched over 1.5 million acres. An ancient system, a subtropical wilderness that pulsed with life. This place was worth more than $31 billion every single year. It wasn't just pretty. It provided flood protection for millions of people. It gave them clean drinking water. It kept South Florida alive. Life here moved in perfect balance. Huge flocks of wading birds covered the sky. Herons and egrets and ibis flew so thick they looked like clouds. Raccoons and opossums scurried through the sawgrass. Marsh rabbits hopped between the plants. Bobcats stalked the edges of tree islands called hammocks. Native foxes hunted at night. It was one of the last truly wild places in America. But humans misunderstood how fragile it was. The Everglades looked strong. It looked like it could handle anything. Therefore, people thought they could change it without consequences. They drained wetlands. They built cities. They carved canals through the heart of the system. The ecosystem bent under the pressure, but it didn't break, not yet. The food web was deeply interconnected. Raccoons ate frogs, snakes ate rats, birds ate fish, bobcats ate rabbits. Everything depended on everything else. Remove one piece and the whole thing could collapse. But nobody was thinking about that in August of 1992. Hurricane Andrew, a monster Category 5 storm, tore through southern Florida. The winds screamed at over 165 miles per hour. It flattened entire neighborhoods. It destroyed lives. And it ripped apart a reptile breeding facility near Miami. When the winds finally died down, an unknown number of Burmese pythons had escaped. These weren't local snakes. They came from Southeast Asia. They slipped away into the wetlands during the chaos. Therefore, the invasion had begun, but nobody knew it yet. At the exact same time, something else was happening. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Burmese pythons were the hot new exotic pet. People bought them as tiny $10 snakes. They thought they were cool. But those cute snakes don't stay small, they grow fast. A snake that fits in your hand becomes a 10-foot, 50-pound monster in just a few years. Some grow over 20 feet long. They can weigh over 200 pounds, heavy enough to take down a full-grown deer. Pet owners panicked when their snakes got huge. Therefore, they made a terrible choice. They drove to the edge of the Everglades and just let them go. They thought they were setting them free. They thought the snakes would just disappear. Instead, they were lighting a fuse on an ecological time bomb. For years, nobody paid attention. A few sightings here and there were just curiosities. Park rangers would see one and write a report. Scientists would shrug. Florida already had lots of snakes. But these pythons weren't just surviving. They were thriving. The Everglades was paradise for them. The heat was perfect. The humidity was perfect. The endless shallow water was perfect. And there was food everywhere. Mountains of food. Animals that had never seen a predator like this before. Therefore, the pythons had every advantage. They're masters of camouflage. They vanish into the grass. They can hold their breath underwater for over 30 minutes. They have thermal sensing pits along their jaws. They can see the body heat of warm-blooded animals in total darkness. A raccoon doesn't stand a chance. And then there's the breeding. A single female can lay up to 100 eggs at once. With no predators to stop them, their numbers exploded. Today, experts estimate between 100,000 and 300,000 pythons live in South Florida. The paradise that was bursting with life started falling silent, but the first data showing mammal declines confused everyone. Scientists thought their equipment was broken. They thought they were counting wrong. Therefore, they went back and counted again. The numbers didn't change. They got worse. The swamp was going quiet. The numbers came in, and they were horrifying. A landmark study from 2012 revealed the truth. In the hardest hit areas, raccoon populations dropped by 99.3%. Opossums were down 98.9%. Bobcats fell by 87.5%. Think about that. Not 10%, not 50%, 99% gone. But officials didn't know how many pythons escaped in the first place. Therefore, they couldn't measure the true scale of the disaster. Was it hundreds? Thousands? Nobody knew. Hunters who had worked in the Everglades for decades noticed the silence first. They used to see raccoons crossing the roads every night. They used to dodge turtles. Now they drove for miles and saw nothing. Therefore, scientists realized something was deeply wrong. The food web was collapsing from the bottom up. Small mammals vanished. Then the predators that ate them started disappearing too. Hawks had no prey. Panthers starved. The whole system was unraveling, but the state's response was underwhelming at first. In 2013, officials launched the Florida Python Challenge. It was part publicity stunt, part desperate lottery ticket. They invited regular people to hunt pythons. Anyone brave enough could enter. They offered cash prizes, $10,000 for removing the most snakes. It became an annual event. By 2024, over 800 hunters showed up. They came from all over the country. Some came from Canada. They brought traps and snake hooks and nerves of steel. That year, they captured 195 pythons. The headlines were great. The photos were dramatic. It felt like victory. But here's the problem. Let's do the math. They removed 195 snakes. The next year, they broke the record with 294 snakes removed. Sounds impressive, right? Therefore, you'd think they were winning. But if there are 100,000 pythons in the wild, removing 294 is less than 0.3%. If the real number is 300,000, the impact is basically zero. It's like emptying the ocean with a teaspoon while the tide comes in. The Everglades wasn't healing. It was just a backdrop for a competition, and the pythons were breeding faster than people could catch them. Therefore, the state got more serious. They brought in professionals. The South Florida Water Management District hired elite hunters. These weren't weekend warriors. These were career python trackers. They got paid hourly wages to stalk the swamps day and night. Since 2017, these contractors removed thousands of pythons. Combined with all efforts, over 23,000 pythons were taken from the wild. It sounds impressive, but even that massive number is probably less than 5% of the population. For every snake they find, 20 more hatch in the grass. Frustrated officials turned to technology. They launched drones with thermal cameras. They thought they could spot the pythons from above, find their heat signatures. But there was a problem. The Everglades is hot. The ground is hot. The water is hot. Pythons are cold-blooded. They match the temperature around them. Therefore, thermal cameras couldn't tell a snake from a warm rock. Plus, the thick trees made spotting anything impossible. The drones failed. Then they tried robot rabbits. Engineers built fake rabbits that gave off heat and made sounds. They wanted to lure pythons into traps. It didn't work. Pythons are ambush predators. They wait still for real prey. They weren't interested in noisy robots. The most successful idea used scout snakes. Researchers called them Judas snakes. They'd catch a male python and put a radio tracker inside it. Then they'd release it during mating season. Therefore, the male would lead them to females. This worked sometimes. They found some big breeding females, but it was slow, it was expensive, and it barely made a dent. Here's where it gets weird. Hunters started noticing something strange. The snakes seemed to know where traps were. They avoided the roads where people walked. The Judas snakes led them on bizarre, circular paths for months. Almost like they knew they were being followed. Was it possible the pythons were learning? Were they getting smarter? It's a terrifying thought. Years passed. Billions of dollars spent. Endless experiments. All pointing to the same truth. The pythons had won. Scientists admitted it publicly. Full eradication is impossible. The best anyone can do is control the numbers. But the real enemy wasn't the python everyone was hunting. The real enemy was invisible. Deep in the lab, scientists opened up dead snakes, native snakes, garter snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, water snakes. They were skinny, weak, struggling to breathe before they died. But when scientists cut them open, they found a horror show. The snake's lungs were packed with tiny worms. Dozens of them, sometimes hundreds, little white parasites writhing inside the airways. Therefore, scientists knew something new had arrived in Florida. They called it Rhabdius pseudospherocephala. Most people just call it the snake lungworm. It originally comes from Asia, the same place Burmese pythons come from. Over thousands of years, pythons and this parasite evolved together. The pythons can carry the worms, but they rarely get sick. They built up defences, but Florida's native snakes had no defence at all. This was a brand new enemy. Therefore, native snakes were dying in huge numbers. Here's how the plague spreads. It's terrifyingly simple. First, an infected python poops in the swamp. The droppings contain lungworm eggs. Cockroaches and insects eat the waste. The eggs hatch inside the bugs. Then lizards and frogs eat the infected insects. Finally, a native snake eats that infected frog. Once inside the snake's stomach, the larvae don't stay there. They tunnel through the stomach wall. They migrate to the lungs. They grow. They feed on blood and tissue. They reproduce. They clog the airways until the snake can't breathe. Therefore, native snakes suffocate while starving. Researchers found snakes with severe pneumonia. They found bleeding lesions in lungs. In the worst cases, they found worms crawling out of the snake's mouth as it gasped for air. This is the real hidden aftermath. The pythons were the first wave. They killed the mammals. The parasite is the second wave. It's here to kill the native reptiles. But the real shock came when scientists mapped how far it spread. The lungworm wasn't just in the Everglades anymore. At least 18 different native snake species got infected. The parasite spread through dozens of counties. Some reports show it as far north as Jacksonville. It's creeping toward the Panhandle. And here's the part that terrifies scientists. The pythons started this, but the lungworm doesn't need them anymore. It jumped ship. It established itself in native hosts. Now it spreads on its own from native snake to native snake. Therefore, even if every python vanished tomorrow, the parasite would stay. It's here, it's alive, it's thriving. When native snakes vanish, the balance collapses again. Rodents multiply without predators. Hawks and eagles lose their food. The whole system tips over. Now the wild theories started flying. First question, is this thing mutating? It already jumped from Asian pythons to North American snakes. What stops it from jumping again? Second question, could it infect mammals? Could it infect humans? Researchers say it's highly unlikely, but here's the catch. They didn't think it could jump to garter snakes either, but it did. Therefore, nobody really knows what's safe anymore. What if a dog eats an infected frog? What if a hunter handles an infected snake and touches their face? Right now, scientists say we're fine. But in a world where this parasite adapts every day, safe is a very big word. There is one strange twist. The Florida cottonmouth, a native pit viper, seems resistant to the parasite. Not immune, but resistant. It doesn't die as easily. Nobody knows why. Is it genetics? Is it diet? Is it something in their blood? Therefore, this mystery has its own theory. What if the cottonmouth is the key? What if studying its blood could create a cure? An anti-parasite treatment? Right now, there's no cure. There's no treatment. There's no way to stop it. What began as a battle against a visible monster became a war against an invisible one. The pythons killed with teeth. The parasite kills with silence. Scientists watched helplessly as the survivors of the python invasion fell to this new plague. Florida was out of options. The mammals were gone. The reptiles were dying. The ecosystem was on life support. Therefore, officials made a choice. They announced a plan so crazy that the entire world laughed out loud. They were going to release more snakes into the wild. Not just any snakes, hundreds of them. Big ones. The announcement hit the news like a bomb. Social media exploded. Doesn't Florida have enough snakes already? Fighting snakes with more snakes? What could possibly go wrong? The mockery was instant and brutal, but humans were desperate, and nature was about to show them something they never expected. The home team was starting to fight back. In the Big Cypress National Preserve, researchers tracked a python, a big one. They named him Loki. He was 13 feet long and weighed 52 pounds. A GPS tracker was surgically attached to him. They were studying his breeding patterns, where he went, who he met. One December morning, they checked his location. The signal wasn't moving. Therefore, they went to investigate. They found his massive body sprawled in the grass. But something was very wrong. His head was completely gone, chewed off, hidden under pine needles nearby. This was a 52-pound apex predator. What could do this? An alligator? Maybe. A panther? Possibly. A few days later, a trail camera nearby revealed the culprit. It was a bobcat, a native Florida bobcat. Biologists estimated it weighed barely 25 pounds. Everyone was stunned. Wildlife experts called it a first. A bobcat half the python's size had stalked it, killed it, eaten it. For 20 years, pythons were the undisputed monsters. Everything feared them. But suddenly, one of Florida's own predators turned the tables. Therefore, the question became, was this a fluke or something more? Some experts guessed a cold snap slowed the python down, made it sluggish, made it vulnerable. That's the easy explanation. But here's the wild theory. What if the native predators are learning? This wasn't the only story. Across Florida, more evidence appeared. Alligators started ambushing smaller pythons. These are the original kings of the swamp. They ruled here for millions of years. Therefore, when the pythons invaded, the gators didn't just disappear, they watched, they learned. Now they were fighting back. The Florida panther, endangered and rare, was documented taking on pythons too. These big cats are smart, they're adaptable, they hunt deer and hogs, but now they're hunting snakes. Here's where it gets interesting. What if predators are teaching each other? Not with words, but with behaviour. One bobcat watches another. It sees the weak spots. It learns the timing. Then it passes that knowledge to its young. Therefore, adaptation could accelerate between generations. Think about it. Every predator that survives an encounter with a python learns something. Where to bite, when to strike, how to avoid the coils. Those survivors have babies. Those babies grow up in a world where pythons exist. They're born into the war. One wildlife biologist called the bobcat kill a score for the home team. The Everglades weren't just dying, they were changing. The ecosystem was reshaping itself in real time. But adaptation is painfully slow. a single bobcat can't undo 20 years of destruction. For every python a predator kills, thousands more hatch in hidden nests. The home team got on the scoreboard, but they're still losing the game. Therefore, the other part of this story becomes critical. The desperate plan. The one everyone mocked. While native predators learned to fight, humans made their most controversial move yet. They announced they were releasing a species back into the wild, a native snake that vanished 50 years ago. Its name is the eastern indigo snake, and it's known as the emperor of the forest. The world laughed when Florida announced the plan. People compared it to the cane toads in Australia. Those toads were supposed to control beetles. Instead, they multiplied into billions and became a toxic plague. People brought up the mongooses in Hawaii, brought in to kill rats in sugar fields. But mongooses hunt during the day. Rats come out at night. Therefore, they never even met. The mongooses wiped out Hawaii's ground birds instead. Everyone screamed this was the same mistake. But here's what the mockers didn't know. The eastern indigo snake isn't an invader, it's a native species. It lived here first. Humans wiped it out through habitat destruction and hunting. Therefore, this wasn't about adding a new predator. It was about bringing back the rightful king. The indigo is the longest native snake in North America. It can grow 9 feet long. Its scales shimmer blue-black in the sun. There's a patch of reddish-orange under its chin. But its beauty isn't what makes it special. Its diet makes it legendary. The eastern indigo eats other snakes. It's completely immune to pit viper venom. Rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, copperheads. The indigo eats them all. It doesn't constrict prey. It just pins them with powerful jaws and swallows them alive. It's the boss of the forest floor. But its kingdom crumbled long ago. The eastern indigo snake's kingdom used to stretch from South Carolina through Georgia and Florida to Mississippi. It was vast. It was ancient. But that kingdom fell apart. The indigo's fate is tied to 2 things: longleaf pine forests and gopher tortoises. First, the forests. The snake thrived in the longleaf pine ecosystem. This habitat once covered nearly 90 million acres across the southeast. Today, 97% of it is gone. Logging took most of it. Development took the rest. Fire suppression changed what remained. Therefore, the indigo lost its home. Second, the tortoise. The eastern indigo doesn't dig burrows. It can't. It relies almost entirely on burrows dug by the gopher tortoise. These burrows are deep sandy tunnels. They offer shelter from fire and cold. Over 350 species depend on these burrows. The gopher tortoise is a keystone species. The whole ecosystem is built around it. But as the pine forests got cut down, the tortoises got hunted and displaced. During the Great Depression, people dug them up for food. They killed any snakes hiding inside. Therefore, the indigo snake vanished with them. By 1978, the eastern indigo was listed as threatened. It was completely wiped out from Alabama and North Florida. The emperor was gone. So here's the truth about the laughable plan. It wasn't about adding a new snake. It was about restoring a native apex predator that humans already destroyed. For decades, conservation groups worked in secret. They bred indigos in captivity, carefully, slowly. They restored patches of longleaf pine forest. They protected gopher tortoise populations. Therefore, what looked impulsive to the public was actually one of the most careful restoration projects ever attempted. But that doesn't mean the theories are wrong. What if this becomes the mongoose scenario? What if releasing an apex predator into an already broken system makes things worse? What will the indigos eat after they eat the pythons? If they even can. What if they become the new problem? Scientists swear they did the research. They planned every detail. They tested every variable. But that's what they said in Hawaii too. The public mockery continued for months. News outlets called it insane. Social media exploded with jokes, fighting snakes with snakes, Florida doing Florida things. But behind the headlines, something extraordinary was happening. Conservation teams released their captive-bred indigos into protected land in North Florida. The Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve. This is hundreds of miles north of the python stronghold. But it's the indigo's ancestral home. They tagged the snakes. They tracked them with GPS. They hoped for survival. Therefore, they waited to see if the emperor could return. Months passed, then years. The snakes stayed alive. They hunted. They explored. But the real test was reproduction. Could they breed in the wild after 50 years of absence? In autumn of 2023, trail cameras captured something incredible. The footage showed two young indigo snakes, wild-born. They were the offspring of released adults. Biologists confirmed one wasn't tagged. Therefore, it was born entirely without human help. This was the first time in nearly half a century that eastern indigo snakes successfully reproduced in the wild in North Florida. This wasn't survival anymore. This was revival. Teams spotted more snakes in 2024 and 25. A strong 6-foot male glided through the scrub. 19 other snakes from earlier releases were still thriving. The ecosystem wasn't just being restored, it was beginning to function again. The heart of this recovery is the land itself. The slow, hard work of restoring longleaf pines paid off, protecting tortoise burrows paid off, creating safe habitat paid off. Therefore, the indigos came back because the ecosystem could support them again. But here's the thing everyone asks. Does this mean indigos will eat all the pythons? Does this solve the crisis? No, of course not. The indigos are being released in North Florida. The python stronghold is hundreds of miles south in the Everglades. They aren't even in the same arena yet. But that's not the point. The real unexpected aftermath is twofold. First, nature itself is adapting. The bobcats are learning. The alligators are learning. Native predators are figuring out how to fight. Second, a conservation plan built on patience and science actually worked. For decades, the Everglades story was about human failure. We failed to stop the invasion. We failed to remove the snakes. We looked for high-tech solutions, and they all failed. But the real solution wasn't a robot. It wasn't a drone. It was a native snake. It was slow, hard work. It was restoring the land and bringing back the king. The pythons are still a crisis. The lungworm is still spreading. But footage from Florida finally revealed something nobody expected. Hope? Resilience? Therefore, the question shifts. The question becomes, what happens next? What happens when the indigo's territory, spreading south, collides with the python's territory, spreading north? And more importantly, what happens when the lungworm meets the emperor? The parasite is spreading north too. Moving through native snake populations, killing as it goes. Are we restoring a native species only to feed it to an invisible monster? What if the lungworm infects the newly restored indigo snakes? What if the recovery we're celebrating becomes the next disaster? The real aftermath isn't an ending. It's the start of something bigger, something nobody saw coming. A three-way war. Scientists pulled up the data and drew 3 lines on a map. 3 collision paths, red for the pythons, blue for the lungworm, green for the indigos, red line, pythons established in the Everglades and spreading slowly north. Their breeding grounds are rock solid. Tens of thousands hatch every year. They're moving up the coast, claiming new territory. Blue line, lungworms spreading north through native snake populations. It doesn't need pythons anymore. It established itself in 18 native species. It's in dozens of counties. It moves with every infected snake, every infected frog, every cockroach that eats infected waste. Green line, indigo snakes expanding south from their restored habitat. breeding successfully, growing in numbers, reclaiming old territory 1 mile at a time. 3 forces, 3 directions, all heading toward the same place. Therefore, an inevitable collision is coming. Footage started coming in that made scientists nervous. Trail cameras showed python carcasses with lungworm present. The parasites were in the grass near bobcat kills. They were in the water where alligators hunted. Native snakes kept dying. Autopsies showed lungs packed with worms. The parasite was advancing north faster than anyone predicted, but the indigos were moving south at their own pace. Slow, steady, natural. The lines on the map kept getting closer. Scientists realized what was about to happen. The 3 forces would meet: python, parasite, and emperor. But nobody knew what would happen when they did. Here's the nightmare scenario. The indigo snakes reach python territory and start hunting them. That's good. That's what everyone wants. But while they're eating pythons, they're also eating infected frogs, infected lizards, infected native snakes. Therefore, they get exposed to the lungworm. What if indigos aren't resistant? What if the parasite kills them just like it kills garter snakes and water snakes? Then we just restored a species to watch it die. The whole recovery collapses. Here's another scenario. Indigos are resistant to the lungworm because of something in their genetics. They eat pythons without getting sick. They spread south and establish themselves as the new apex predator. But pythons breed so fast that indigos can't keep up. There aren't enough indigos. There won't be for decades. Therefore, pythons stay dominant while the parasite keeps killing native species. Nothing really changes. The war just has more players. Here's the wildest scenario. The 3 forces create a new balance. Indigos eat enough pythons to slow their breeding. Native predators like bobcats and alligators keep learning and adapting. The lungworm kills weak snakes, but resistant ones survive and pass on their genes. Therefore, the ecosystem doesn't return to what it was. It becomes something new, something that never existed before. A changed Everglades. Not destroyed, but transformed. Scientists started admitting uncomfortable truths publicly. Full eradication of pythons is impossible. The numbers are too high. The habitat is too vast. The best anyone can hope for is containment. But here's what nobody expected. Containment might be enough. Footage showed the moments that made scientists pause. A bobcat stalking a python. An alligator dragging one underwater. An indigo snake gliding through restored pine forest. Native animals fighting back. The home team wasn't winning, but they weren't losing anymore either. Then came the moment that changed everything. The holy shit moment everyone was waiting for. A research team in North Florida examined a batch of native snakes, species that were previously thought resistant to the lungworm. They cut them open. The lungs were full of parasites. Therefore, the lungworm was adapting. It was learning to infect species it couldn't touch before. It was mutating, evolving, becoming more dangerous. This was the central revelation. The aftermath everyone missed. The invasion wasn't one thing. It was 3 separate disasters happening at once. The python invasion killed the mammals. The lungworm plague killed the native reptiles. And the restoration of the indigo created a wild card nobody could predict. Nature was reshaping Florida in real time. 3 forces colliding, each one changing the others. Scientists answered the question from the beginning. What did the cameras capture in the swamp? What left them speechless? Not just a python invasion, not just a parasite plague, a transformation, an evolutionary war happening at lightning speed. The Everglades wasn't dying the way everyone thought. It was evolving violently. The footage showed pythons hunting in grass. It showed worms crawling from dead snake mouths. It showed indigos gliding through their old kingdom. It showed bobcats learning to kill. Each clip was a piece of the puzzle. Together, they revealed the truth. Florida's ecosystem won't return to what it was. That world is gone forever. But something new is being born, something unpredictable, something dangerous. 3 armies in one swamp: Python, Parasite, and Emperor. The cameras saw what experts missed. The aftermath isn't about winning or losing, it's about survival, adaptation, evolution under pressure. Therefore, the question isn't, can we fix the Everglades? The question is, what will the Everglades become? And nobody knows the answer yet. The Everglades is still losing species. That part hasn't changed. Raccoons remain at 1% of their original numbers. Opossums are nearly extinct in the python zones. Small mammals that formed the base of the food chain are gone. But new predators are learning to fight back. Bobcats hunt pythons now. It's rare, but it happens. Alligators ambush them in the water. Panthers test their luck. Each successful kill teaches the next generation something valuable. Therefore, adaptation is happening, just painfully slow. The parasite remains unstoppable. There's no cure, there's no treatment, no way to remove it from the wild. Even if every python vanished tomorrow, the lungworm would stay. It lives in native hosts now. It spreads on its own. It's evolving to infect new species. Therefore, the long-term ecological impact is inevitable and permanent. But here's what nobody expected. The indigo snakes are breeding in restored habitat. Not in huge numbers yet. Not enough to turn the tide. But they're alive. They're reproducing. They're reclaiming old territory, one burrow at a time. The future is uncertain. Will they reach the python stronghold? Will they survive the lungworm? Will they make a difference? Nobody knows. But the Emperor is back. That matters. The home team scored. That bobcat killing the python was more than a lucky hit. It was symbolic, a message. Florida's native species aren't giving up. Therefore, balance might return, but in a new form. Not the old Everglades. Something different, something stranger. This story has broader implications. Invasive species crises rarely end. They transform. They force ecosystems to adapt or die. The Everglades is adapting, but violently, painfully, with massive losses. Other places face similar battles. Brown tree snakes in Guam, cane toads in Australia, lionfish in the Caribbean. Each crisis is unique, but they share the same lesson. Once you open the door to an invader, you can't close it. You can only learn to live with what comes through. Humans caused the Everglades collapse. We brought the pythons. We destroyed the habitat. We wiped out the indigo snakes decades before the pythons even arrived. But nature responds in unexpected ways. Sometimes it fights back. Sometimes it finds new balance. Sometimes it just changes into something unrecognizable. Therefore, the Everglades is teaching us something important. We can't control nature. We can only work with it. The high-tech solutions failed. The hunting competitions barely helped. The drones were useless. What actually worked? Restoring native habitat, bringing back native species, giving the ecosystem tools to heal itself. It's slow, it's hard, it's frustrating. But it's working, kind of. The swamp isn't dying the way everyone predicted. It's not becoming a python paradise while everything else vanishes. It's becoming something new. A battlefield, a laboratory, a place where evolution happens fast and brutal. 3 forces are reshaping Florida right now. The python invasion that everyone knows about, the parasite plague that nobody saw coming, and the restoration of a native predator that might change everything. Each one affects the others. Python eats prey. Parasite infects python and native snakes. Indigo eats both. Parasite might infect indigo. Native predators learn to eat python. Parasite spreads through the food web. It's a 3-dimensional chess game played by nature itself, and humans are just watching from the sidelines now. The footage revealed what experts missed for 20 years. The aftermath isn't just destruction, it's transformation. Violent, unpredictable, evolutionary transformation. The Everglades isn't dying, it's evolving. And the final question hangs in the humid Florida air. The question nobody can answer yet. What happens when the emperor meets the parasite? When green line meets blue line? When the restored indigo population expands south and encounters the spreading lungworm? When apex predator meets invisible killer? Will the indigos survive? Will they adapt? Will they develop resistance? Or will we watch them fall to the same plague that's killing everything else? The cameras will keep recording. Scientists will keep tracking. Nature will keep transforming. The war isn't over, it's just beginning. And this time, there are three sides.